Hey, Tracy's back. Good to see you again.
How is everyone today?
Good. How about you?
I choose to be awesome, therefore I am.
Excellent. I love it. I
Yes.
love it. There's Madison again. Stephanie.
Welcome to Tyler Paris's 5-day challenge. You are in day 4, Chief of Staff as Coach. And now let's welcome your host, Tyler Paris.
Hey, welcome everybody to day 4 of our 5-day Chief of Staff challenge. We are almost done. I know, it's sad, but we still have tomorrow. And in our remaining 2 days, and for a half hour each day, I'm still going to give you at least one immediately applicable tool, tip, or framework that helps you do your chief of staff job better. So that by the end of these 5 days, you should be adding value in at least 5 new ways for your leadership team. So, of course, these 5 days are also designed to just give you a little taste of what we cover in our mastermind cohorts. Doug was one of our first cohort members, and he actually wanted to tell you in 30 seconds or less about his cohort experience. So, John, can you help us get
When you consider the curriculum, the new network of peers you create that will be able to connect with you throughout your career, the one-on-one coaching time with Tyler, and the volume of resources he brings to the group, including tools and tips, external speakers and experts, really the value for your money just cannot be beat by any course or training that I've been a part of in the corporate setting. So I highly recommend the Chief of Staff Mastermind cohort and enjoy the experience.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. And of course, Doug joins Anne Mary and Joshua, whom you've also heard from this week, in saying that the value of our cohorts was great enough for them to unpaid take time out of their chief of staff day to make a video about it. When was the last time you felt strongly enough about a service offering at work that you just said, I'm going to go ahead and make a video about this and send it off to them so they have it? So just to get us started today, first, I owe you a recap from yesterday. I haven't forgotten, but Wednesday is my kid's early release day from school, so I bolted from our call to go get them, and the rest of the day was, shall we say, unpredictable. Second, I want each of you to share with the group today one question that someone has asked you that helped expand your thinking or helped you see a blind spot. And I'll drop mine in there too, and we'll compare notes. So for those of you just joining us, we're going to drop in the chat one question someone else asked you that expanded your thinking or helped you see a blind spot. Okay. So I'm going to put mine in here too.
Yeah, Tyler, it was so funny. I talked to somebody too who said that I'm over Toastmasters about speaking skills, and I challenged her to sign up for a TED Talk, and her first reaction was, "Hell no." But then afterwards, she says, "Okay, I commit to do that." So that was her blind spot. She thought she was done with it, and we found a place where she was not done.
Nice. What would happen if you shifted from I have to I get to? Well, that's good. I like that.
Thank you, Tracy.
Hey, Taylor and Katie and Eden, good to see you all. Glad you could make it. We are just dropping in the chat real quick one question somebody has asked you that expanded your thinking or helped you see a blind spot. We're just dropping that in the chat. Yeah, what are you learning? That's a good one.
How could you turn this into an opportunity?
I know you can do more, but can you do less? Oh, that's a good one.
Jessica. Dropping nuggets. Anybody else? Take a time to chat one question Someone else has asked that help you expand your thinking or your blind spot.
What is the best use of this day? Absolutely. That's a good one.
Oh, Katie, you remind me of the other one. Actually, Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer used to do this. They used to ask each other, do you need to be at this meeting? And they would look at each other's calendar and try and remove as many meetings as possible from their calendar. That was useful.
It kind of echoes back to that point of meeting management we talked about yesterday. We're at the gap. Everyone was empowered to say no to a meeting if they didn't feel it was the best use of their time. You could say that to the CEO. If the CEO invited you to a meeting and you didn't think it was the best use of your time, you were empowered all the way up to that level to say no. So in fact, it was the CEO's rule. So
here's our last one, Tyler. What could you accomplish if you had endless resources?
I like that. Yeah, good. You could take the flip side. What if you had zero resources? Like, what if we got zero revenue tomorrow? What would we, or next year, how would we shift operations, or how would we do things? So, working with those extremes, those are all great examples. Thank you for sharing those. A lot of chiefs of staff like to claim this role of confidant and counselor to an executive. And the other day we were talking about calculating the value you add for your exec, and Richard brought up some really interesting points about that. But sometimes we like to claim that title, but sometimes folks really aren't the confidant or the counselor. They're just order takers. And I think that's unfortunate, because a lot of the value in the chief of staff role is lost when you're merely an order taker. So when I interviewed Brad Smith, then at the time he was the chair at Intuit a couple of years ago for a blog post, he told me this a story of how his chief of staff's question about a leadership conference changed how he saw the whole event. And he said, if the chief of staff had just followed me trying to make this a great meeting, we would have been really tactical instead of really strategic. In other words, we would have had a really good meeting, but we might not have met our objectives 12 months from that meeting. And so that was a great lesson for him to learn. And so for Brad Smith, at least, the chief of staff as coach is the difference between playing chess and playing checkers. And so I'll put the link to that full interview in the chat so you can read it whenever. It's probably about a 7-minute read or so. And today we're going to walk through a primer on the chief of staff as coach. I served 2.5 years as a chief of staff at Intellectual Ventures, who paid for me to get my executive coaching certification while I was in the chief of staff role, because while I had built and managed teams in large and small companies in the US Marines and in nonprofits, this was a pioneering company trying to accomplish something nobody had really done before in creating a capital class out of intellectual property. And so much of my work was driving transformational change with senior leaders in the organization. And IV saw the value of coaching in shifting leaders and the leadership team to where they needed to go. So here's a question for the group. What is a coach, or what is coaching? And you can come off mute, state your name and your idea, or you can just drop the ideas in the chat. What is a coach? We'll just take about a minute to sort of field some answers. Asking the right question at the right time. Good. Have you been reading my notes?
Katie can see through the internet.
Yes. A coach is a Sherpa. I like that. Yes, a guide. Seeing the potential in someone, something, and nurturing that out. Yeah. If I can, Amy, I'll say maybe quasi therapist. I actually am really quick to say we are not therapists. Most coaches are not versed in the DSM and the diagnostic manual, and we are not equipped to diagnose or treat sort of deep-seated psychological issues, but You're right. It's kind of like that. And there's certain aspects of that certainly, and I know most therapists, actually, I would say it the other way around. Most therapists operate with some coaching tools and techniques too. So I like that. That's a good point. I'm glad you brought up someone who partners with you to ruthlessly interrogate reality. That's good. I like that. Tracy is on a
Ruthless.
roll today. This is great. You need to speak up more in these sessions. We haven't heard much from you until today, man. You're just on fire. This is great. The coach is a mirror, yes, helping you reflect and see what you might or might not have seen yet. Helping people and teams get better. And Ted Lasso believe. I still got to catch that. I haven't seen it yet, but these are all great answers. And I'd submit to you that really a coach, contextualized a little bit for the chief of staff role, is someone who asks powerful questions that expands others' thinking and helps them see new options for moving forward where they're stuck. So it could be partly advice giving, but that should be a very, very small part of what they do. It's usually more in the questions, and then illuminating blind spots for the exec and the leadership team, which is where that mirroring comes in. When you reflect things back to people, they see their situation in a different way. It identifies and helps your exec or a specific member of the leadership team or the team collectively to break bad habits. So you can kind of help and be that guide or that Sherpa that helps people kind of navigate the waters as they unlearn an old way of doing things and relearn something new. And then finally, I would say a coach understands change, how change works, resistance to change, and why people resist, and helps individuals and teams through the work of change and resistance to change. So, you can take a year-long or longer coach training or certification and really deep dive on coaching like I did. The International Coaching Federation is a professional body governing coaches. They have a whole set of competencies. For today, I want to dig into one area of coaching. It's the one that I've seen make the biggest difference for chiefs of staff in resolving team conflict, getting alignment, creating shared context, and being the trusted advisor of the principal exec. Can anyone guess what that might be? You can drop it in the chat, or you can just come off mute and call it out.
I think Tracy should unmute and just tell us what the right answer is.
Humility.
So you see, I've got my scandal background today, so I'm channeling my inner Olivia Pope.
This is it.
Get your red wine out, Tracy. Let's do this.
She's got that 32-ounce wine glass. I found where one can get that.
Nice.
What do you think it is, Tracy?
I think it's definitely about the questions. And when I use interrogate reality, that's really what it is. Because for me, I feel it's my obligation to just say, okay, you're making that decision based on this thought pattern. Presently, that thought pattern is your reality. But now let's question that reality. Because then that can change how you actually see this and what solutions you think we should apply to this. And so I've often had execs like, can you just for once agree with me? I can, but that's not my role. Because we could both be wrong.
Yeah, I love that. So we can all go down the wrong road faster and more efficiently than everyone else, than our competitors. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. That's great. So John, I'm so glad you just had Tracy come off mute, because that in fact was the answer. It's the questions. Yes. Ding, 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 gold stars. So we didn't coordinate this before. That's really cool. I just want to put you in a quick scenario to drive that point home. So you're in a big meeting and you see where the team needs to go perhaps, but could anybody tell me the benefit of asking the team questions instead of just telling them this is where we should go?
Okay, where's Tracy's protege? Somebody else come off of mute. So you can just unmute if you think you
Yeah,
know.
Katie says it becomes their idea. Madison says to get buy-in. Yeah, absolutely. Ownership, yes.
Okay, there's no one who can replace you, Tracy. You want to come back on?
No, that was it. I think we got 3 good Tracy's in the chat. They just didn't come off mute. So that's great.
3 great Tracy's.
Yeah, they got the answer. So this is great. We've got Katie, Madison, and Rob chiming in here. Yeah, if you tell them what to do, whose idea is it? It's yours, right? And have they even had time to maybe contextualize it or think about, if what worked in a previous situation, is really what's going to work in this situation. They might not have had time to think about it yet. They might not have had time to kind of contextualize it for themselves or for this situation. And so, it can be challenging. And so, by the way, if I didn't say so, hi to Taylor and Christy who joining. You'll hear me say this over and over again before we're done, but open-ended, non-leading questions are one of the most versatile tools in your leadership toolbox, period. Questions come in handy in just about any situation. Divergent thinking activities with your team where you're, getting all the ideas up on the whiteboard. And then the convergent activities where you prioritize and you start whittling down all those big ideas to which are the ones that we can actually put plans around and throw resources at and get something done. They come in handy in conflict situations. They come in handy with problem solving. Are we solving the right problem here? So many great scenarios for problem solving where questions can just help the team get to the right thing. Tough conversations with your boss. So this is something Tracy alluded to a minute ago. And it's really kind of the linchpin of a bit of a curriculum that I've run at Chief of Staff Mixers in the past, and we do in the cohort as well, which is tough conversations with people who outrank you. You're often in a room with people who get paid really differently than you and may have more seniority. I know when I was at Intellectual Ventures, I was literally surrounded by MIT rocket scientists and Harvard law degrees everywhere. I don't have those pedigrees. So there was a bit of an imposter syndrome sometimes, and yet I was able to ask questions that would steer even those folks, those really smart folks, in the right direction. And so having, whether it was a good news conversation or just an exploratory conversation. And so I submit to you that a well-placed, open-ended question and a non-leading question diffuses defensiveness, stimulates deeper thinking, and creates breakthrough thinking. So those kind of questions can generate information that everyone can use. So, for example, in a conflict, if you say, if you say I'm angry or I disagree with something, you might be stating your position, but it doesn't necessarily invite any new information into the situation or to help anybody explore that differently. I'm not saying you shouldn't ever tell anybody you're angry. I think there's a time and place to just state where you're at, and that's okay. But sometimes people just get stuck there and they just keep saying the same thing over and over again. And then it's just entrenched positional argumentation instead of really generating other ideas. So questions can generate examples that help people see what you're talking about. Questions can help suggest how disagreeable ideas might need to be changed to make them acceptable to those who disagree. And so by way of contrast, what is a leading question? We all hear on TV, lawyers object to something, I object, Your Honor, it's a leading question. What does that actually mean? Because I think if you ask different people, they have different kind of understandings of what that means. Again, you can use the chat, you can come off mute. We're not a huge group here, so just come off mute and tell us what your answer is. What is a leading question? Some of you are furiously Googling right now. I can sense it. I sense a disturbance in the force. Leading questions drive toward an intended outcome. Yeah, they definitely can. I would even say like the presupposed outcome or the outcome you want to drive it toward, right? It presupposes the outcome.
Rob
So
Fassett in the chat today.
yeah, the CEO thinks. What do you think? Yeah, yeah, that could be a really good one. Yeah, anything prefaced with the CEO blah, a lot of people are just going to go along with that, right? Yeah, they're going to feel an implied threat with that, depending on the culture, depending on the organization. Some have that, some don't. But it's likely. Bosses are often surprised at what people do because they're the boss and said something in a meeting that maybe they didn't ascribe much power to, but because they're the boss, people went and spun up all this work or resources or started doing things when they were just kind of teasing out ideas. So, but I mean, gee, it'd be a real shame if something happened to your butcher shop, wouldn't it? I mean, technically that's a question, but it's a threat disguised as a question, right? Like, leading questions rarely yield new or useful information.
Well, like Tyler, you want to go along with this budget, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Or you wouldn't want me to withhold your budget, would you? I mean, it's like, yeah, or withhold approval for your budget.
Question.
And that's one of the reasons I had you start by chatting a question that expanded your thinking, because I think almost all of you had one of those. What about yes or no questions? Does a yes or no question tend to expand the conversation, learning, and relationship, or does it tend to limit it? What do y'all think? John, I see your questions. Are you hungry? Did you get enough sleep?
Those are yes/no questions.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Yeah, limits. Yeah, they tend to limit. It converges, Richard says. Yeah. Say more about it converges, Richard. Can you come off mute for a sec?
Sure thing. Can you guys see me?
Yeah.
We got you, Richard.
Yeah, I used to think that yes and no question would be limitations, but I don't see it like that anymore. I think context is key here. Sometimes I do use questions that are yes or no because I need my principle to converge. I need to get the clarity. So for context here, the reason I think like this is I lead a large user experience design group. And in user experience design, both converging and expanding are both important. And when I realized that as a chief of staff, came to realize that staying away for yes or no question is in fact limiting for me as a chief of staff. So now instead, what I've developed is carefully, mindfully pick when I need to switch to yes or no question to start getting toward more clarity after we've expanded. Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks for sharing that. That's great. And context is key for sure. That is a really good point. And also certainly having a number of tools in your toolbox is also really powerful. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Do you have some favorite go-to questions? I'd love for you to drop them in the chat, or you can again come off chat and just say them if you want, but I'd love to know what are your favorite go-to chats before we start thinking about wrapping this session up. And when we're done, I'll tell you some of my favorites as well.
Richard gave you a classic. Wait, tell me more. Tell me more about that, Tyler.
Oh, that's a great one.
What do you mean go-to question?
Yeah, that is a good one. What does that look like to you? Yeah, that's a good one. Try to give me more specifics, because when you get again, to Richard's point about context, this is a context-seeking question, right? What does that look like to you? What does that mean? You're probably all familiar with the face-vase conundrum, where you see the same picture and some people see a face, others see a vase in the middle of it. People can look at the exact same problem and see different things.
I saw an elephant, Tyler.
There's so many good analogies and stories about that. How do you feel this aligns with our current priorities? Yes, that's a good one. I love that. What I find with a lot of chiefs of staff, when they have a hard time getting their leadership team to prioritize, it's like, where does this fit? You're asking, 10 things. We've probably got resources, time and effort and energy to do 3. So pick, like, what is it going to be? What's the ideal? Yeah. Kind of establishing that, what do we call it? The aspirational goal, right? Like, where are we headed? How do we get from here to something? And what is the to? What are your concerns about this? Yeah, that's a good one for uncovering potential problems, right? Potential things that could come up, anticipating challenges so that you can either do some scenario planning or other things. I think Royal Dutch Shell was really famous for doing scenario planning decades ago, and really made that almost like its own discipline. And a lot of the companies who have done a lot of that were actually better positioned during the pandemic, when, say, a pandemic broke, or when war breaks out overseas and it starts gumming up supply chains and things. So what has to happen for X to be done? Yeah, thinking through the readiness. A lot of organizations are good at finding the strategy. Like, we have a good offsite, leadership offsite. We'll say, this is the strategy. Everybody knows what they're supposed to do. And then 6 months later, they wonder why they didn't do it, because they never actually sat down to say what needs to happen for that to be in place, and didn't do the organizational readiness piece. And so there's a lot of space in there. And then I guess the next piece of this, in being a trusted advisor for your CEO and kind of playing that chief of staff as coach role, is if you ask a great question, obviously, what's the next step? Anybody?
Listening for the answer?
Yeah, exactly. Listen. You got to listen. Because there's the words. A lot of times there's the meaning behind the words. A lot of times there's the nonverbals. There's what I think it was Richard that talked about the mirroring earlier. It's reflecting back to them. Gee, when the CFO said X in the meeting, I noticed that you sat up on the edge of your chair and you were starting to get pretty animated. What was going on for you there? That's one of those really good ones. Yeah, cool. Well, here we are again, almost at the end of our 30 minutes. And in just 30 short minutes, we've really talked a lot about leading with questions as a way to diffuse defensiveness, stimulate deeper thinking for your exec and leadership team, and using that as one of the tools in your toolbox. In our cohorts, we actually start this topic with a more comprehensive primer, and we actually practice what we call fishbowl coaching. So you can actually practice with people in the room, and you get peer feedback. It can be a little intimidating at first, but it's a really powerful activity. And by the way, most of the courses that you'll ever go to where you get coach training will have you do this fishbowl coaching as one of the activities. So really powerful. And if you're getting value out of these conversations, again, I encourage you to check out the mastermind cohorts. If you're not sure about it yet, I can hang out for a few minutes after this call. I've got about 10 or 15 minutes. I think John needs to drop in the next minute or so. But if any of you have questions about the cohort or coaching in general, you feel free to stick around for a little bit. But if you want to talk more, we can. And for those of you joining us by Zoom, I'm going to stick around. And then for the rest of you, I bid adieu and a great rest of your day. And we'll see you tomorrow for the final value-packed half hour of this challenge. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. You just finished day 4 of the 5-day challenge with Tyler Paris. Join us tomorrow at noon for day 5, our final day of the 5-day Chief of Staff